You whom of all women I most desire. Sappho of Lesbos, circa 630 to 570 CE. In context, focus, the legacy of Sappho. Before, 23rd century BC. Sumerian priestess Enheduanna writes odes to the goddess Inanna, calling herself Inanna's bride. After, 1650 to 1660s, Anglo-Welsh poem Catherine Phillips, the English Sappho, celebrates female love and friendship. 17th to 19th centuries, the terms sapphic and lesbian are increasingly used for women who desire other women. 1840, Caroline Norton, a British feminist poet, writes the picture of Sappho in which Sappho pines for a man. In 2004, Papyrus finds new lines of Sappho's Tithonus poem, nearly completing it. The majority of the works composed by Sappho of Lesbos, one of ancient Greece's most celebrated lyric poems, are lost to us. The Library of Alexandria in Egypt is believed to have contained 9 volumes of her work, with fewer than 1,000 lines survive, mostly in fragments. Reasons for the loss may include fire caused by Roman forces besieged in the city in 48 BC, destruction by the Christian Church after the 4th century AD, due to the poetry's erotic imagery and the natural decay of the papyrus on which it was written. Although only one complete poem remains, the 28-line Ode to Aphrodite, addressed to the Greek goddess of love and beauty, Sappho's name was lived on, becoming synonymous with love between women. Sappho's legacy lies not only in her poetic works, but in her status as an icon for lesbians around the world. Lesbian origins. The term lesbian is derived from Lesbos, an island close to the west coast of present-day Turkey, and is the adjective used to describe its inhabitants. However, the word's etymology as a description of sexuality is complicated. Excuse me. The ancient Greek verb lesbiazine meant to defile, or more accurately, to act like a woman of Lesbos. According to the Dutch scholar Erasmus, circa 1466 to 1536, the women of that island were known for sexual licentiousness, and in particular for engaging in fellatio. A lesbian was therefore someone who engaged in this act. While Sappho's name is now closely identified with lesbianism, many scholars would find it anachronistic to apply that label to the poet. Sapphic and lesbian were not used as terms for women-loving women until at least the 17th century. In Sappho's lifetime, sexuality and sexual identity were not viewed along gender lines. Instead of thinking people as homosexual or heterosexual, both 19th century terms, they were concerned with whether a person, masculine or feminine, took a more sexually active or sexually passive role when engaging in sexual acts. Someone will remember this, I say, even in another time. Sappho, fragment 147. Sapphic verses. Sappho's work is known for her celebration of female beauty and for its declarations of love for other women. In one string of fragments, she sings of a lover named Agnes, whom she loved long ago. In fragment 16, she yearns to see her former lover, Anactoria, her lovely step, her sparkling glance, and her face. Few real men are mentioned by name in Sappho's lyrics. Most of the male figures are mythological. By contrast, Sappho gives the personal names of 14 women, some of whom seem to have been actual Lesbos residents. Sappho herself is not the only woman on Lesbos to experience same-sex desires. In fragment 213, she describes Arcanassa and Gorgo, both women, as yokemates, or wives. Sappho's verses were lauded in her own lifetime, after which they first formed part of an Athenian collection around the 5th century BC, and later in an Alexandrian collection in the 3rd or 2nd century BC, as the Egyptian capital built a repository of Greek literature. Sappho was praised by the 4th, 5th century Greek philosopher Plato, who described her as Sappho the Lovely in reference to her poetry. From at least the 5th century BC, images of Sappho appeared on vases, often with her holding a lyre, a traditional depiction of a poet. She also became a popular character for Greek playwrights, with at least 5 comedies written about her in the 4th century BC. In these works, however, Sappho was often lampooned as having an excessive sexual interest in men. Eros, the melter of limbs, now again stirs me. Sweet, bitter, unmanageable creature who steals in. Sappho, fragment 130. A changing legacy. Sappho's reputation in antiquity is so diverse that some scholars believe there were two women by that name on Lesbos. While Sappho the poet was celebrated, some writers also told of a Sappho who was hetaira or courtesan, associating her with sexual licentiousness. Over the next millennium, the depiction of Sappho varied in any given period. The diverse biographical strands included her suicide due to unrequited love for a man, her sexual whorishness, and her lesbianism. In the 1st century before Christ, the Roman poet Ovid brought those different strands together when he included Sappho in his Heroides, poems in letter form, mostly legendary, about women spurned by the men they love. The poem Sappho the Faun describes Sappho's feelings for women as well as men. In the letter, she foregoes her previous love of women when she meets and falls for Faun, a mythical ferryman given youth and beauty by the goddess Aphrodite. During the early medieval period in Europe, Sappho's popularity waned, but the Renaissance led to a renewed interest in her work, with Sappho celebrated as a talented female poet. French writer Cassine de Pizan praises her wisdom and grace in the feminist Le Livre de la Cité des Dames, the book of the City of Ladies, published in 1405. She was also identified as a tribade, the Roman name for a lesbian, in 15th century Latin commentaries and Venetian editions of Heroides. The association with sex between women was gradually suppressed as vernacular translations began to replace Latin and Greek texts. The image of Sappho continued to change to fit the political and intellectual mores of the period. In the 18th century, she was cast as a heterosexual woman whose embrace of her sexual desires proved her downfall. At the same time, the terms sapphic and lesbian were used to identify and condemn female sex. During the 19th century, some European classical scholars countered the homosexual reading of Sappho by depicting a chaste version. German scholar Ulrich von Wilhelmowitz-Moellendorff imagined Sappho as a schoolmistress, a teacher surrounded by students whom she felt only platonic affection. At the same time, many British female writers, among them Christina Rossetti, Felicia Hermann, and Caroline Norton, found inspiration in Sappho, but as a woman spurned by her lover. Sappho of Lesbos. Born to an aristocratic family in Mytilene on the Greek island of Lesbos around 630 BC, Sappho grew to be a celebrated lyric poet, someone who sang verses accompanied by a lyre, a harp-like instrument. There are ancient allusions to Sappho as her husband, although he is never named. The name does appear in the 10th century CE Suda, a Byzantine lexicon, a kind of encyclopedia but only as a ribald joke. It calls him Kerkules, who came from Andros, which translates as Mr. Penis hailing from the island of Man. Many historians also believe that Sappho was a mother. In fragment 132, she mentions a girl called Cleis, also thought to be the meaning of Sappho's mother, who is described with a Greek word that can mean daughter, child, or slave. Sappho's date and cause of death are uncertain. The 4th century BC Greek dramatist Menander probably created the legend that she died by suicide, jumping from the White Rock of Leucas because of her unrequited love for the mythological ferryman Faun. Reclaiming Sappho. At the end of the 19th century, growing Sappho's movement began to revere the lyric poet as a lover of women and reclaim her as a paragon of lesbian desire. This aspect was picked up by lesbian artists in the early 20th century, such as the writer Radcliffe Hall, who in her poem Ode to Sappho called Sappho immortal lesbian. Sappho was claimed by the feminist movement in the late 1960s and 1970s, and feminist classical scholars began to revisit her work from new perspectives. More and more feminist academics have rejected the 19th century myth of Sappho as a pure schoolmistress, and lesbian feminist poets and writers, such as American Rita Mae Brown and British novelist Jeanette Winterson, have cited her in their own work as a role model, both as a lesbian and a poet. New papyrus fragments of Sappho's work are still being discovered. However, opinion remains divided over the provenance of the most recent fragments from the Brothers' poem published in 2014. Interest in Sappho and her work remains high both in academic and LGBTQ+ circles, with Sapphic studies a popular label for women and non-binary and trans people who are attracted to women. The Sapphic pride flag has pink stripes at the top and bottom with a violet in the center, the flower being associated with Sappho, who in fragment 94 describes her former lesbian lover as wearing crowns of violets and roses. Beloved lesbian, we would dare to claim, by that same tear-fond union with thy lot, yet 'tis enough, if when we breathe thy name, thy soul but listens, and forgets us not.